What do you think you're doing in my children's bed? Damien Lockwood's voice exploded through the guest suite, sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet like a blade. Rain dripped from his clothes onto the polished floor, but he didn't seem to notice. His entire focus was locked on the woman sitting upright on the edge of the mattress, Ava Lambert. She stared back at him with wide, startled eyes, her breath caught in her throat, her hand pressed to her chest as if to steady her racing heart. It was not the look of someone caught doing something wrong. It was the look of someone blindsided, someone who knew she had stepped into a situation far bigger than she ever wanted. On each side of her lay Damien's 7-year-old twins, Harper and Hayes, sleeping more peacefully than they had in 2 years. Their bodies were relaxed, not curled in fear. Their faces were soft, not tense from nightmares. Harper clung to her stuffed dolphin, and Hayes had his hand resting gently on the blanket instead of twisting it the way he usually did when anxiety overtook him. Ava slowly raised her hands in a calm, open gesture, trying not to disturb the children as she whispered, "Please, don't wake them. They were scared. They begged me not to leave." But Damien wasn't listening. Or maybe he heard her, but the storm inside him drowned out every word. His grief, his fear, and the anger he never learned how to handle all rose at once, and his hand struck her before she could finish speaking. The sharp sound echoed off the walls, and Ava staggered from the force, her hand flying to her cheek as she gasped. She didn't shout back. She didn't fall apart. She simply stood there, stunned and quiet, trying to steady herself. Her eyes held a pain far deeper than the slap, but she refused to let it spill out. "You're fired," Damien said, his voice low and trembling. "Get out." Ava looked down at the twins, studying their peaceful faces. She leaned over, gently kissed each child on the forehead, and picked up her shoes. She didn't say a word to Damien as she passed him. She didn't try to explain or defend herself. She didn't beg. She walked down the hallway barefoot and silent, carrying only dignity and heartbreak with her. Mrs. Perez, the longtime housekeeper, stood frozen halfway down the stairs when she saw Ava. Her eyes widened when she noticed the red mark blooming on Ava's cheek. Ava didn't speak. She simply walked past her, pushed open the front door, and stepped into the soft rain. She pulled her thin coat tighter around her body and made her way toward the gate, disappearing into the gray, quiet night. Upstairs, Damien stood motionless beside the bed, breathing hard as the heat of his anger slowly faded. The room had gone still. Truly still. No crying. No whimpering. No frantic tossing and turning. Just the soft, steady breathing of 2 children who looked as though they had finally found peace. Damien moved closer, almost afraid to believe what he was seeing. Harper's brow was smooth. Hayes's small body wasn't tense or defensive. They were asleep, not from exhaustion, not after a breakdown, not from fear or panic, but asleep the way children should sleep. A heaviness formed in Damien's stomach. He sat down slowly on the edge of the mattress, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. 14 nannies in 2 years. Specialists. Therapists. Sleep consultants. Tens of thousands of dollars spent trying to fix what trauma had broken. Nothing worked. Nothing brought the twins calm. Nothing made the house feel safe. Yet this woman, the quiet maid he barely looked at on her first day, had managed what professionals could not. She reached them. She gave them peace. And he had driven her away with the same rage he claimed came from love. For the first time in a very long while, Damien lowered his head into his hands and felt regret settle deep inside him. If you're already feeling something for Ava, for those children, or for the pain inside this home, take a moment to subscribe. Stories like this remind us how quickly people judge, how easily the wrong person gets hurt, and how life can flip in a heartbeat. And if you're watching from somewhere special, drop your country or city in the comments below. I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Now, let's continue. 2 years before the night Damien stood in that bedroom shouting in the dark, Miami had been bright, warm, and calm, the kind of day that made people believe nothing bad could possibly happen. The ocean had been smooth, almost welcoming, reflecting the sky like a sheet of blue glass. Damien's wife, Rachel, had insisted they take the twins out on the family boat that afternoon. Harper was laughing, running along the deck with her hair flying behind her, and Hayes was clutching a bag of snacks he refused to share. Damien remembered that day so clearly it often felt as if he was still living inside it. He remembered the sun, the taste of salt in the air, Rachel's smile. And then, without warning, the memory always jumped straight to the moment the sea turned violent. There had been a sudden shift in the wind, a fast rise of waves that seemed to come out of nowhere. The captain later said the weather alert came too late to avoid the impact. The boat hit a rogue wave hard enough to throw everyone off balance. Damien recalled a scream, his wife's, or maybe Harper's, he was never sure. He remembered water crashing over the rails and the sound of something heavy snapping. He remembered grabbing the twins, feeling their tiny hands clutch his shirt as he tried to steady all three of them. And he remembered the look on Rachel's face right before she was thrown overboard. They never found her. That single moment hollowed out the Lockwood home. It stripped the color from the walls, drained the laughter from the hallways, and left a silence so heavy that even the staff walked softly. From that day on, Damien lived in a state that was not quite grief and not quite survival. Something in between, something raw. He blamed himself. For taking them out. For not holding Rachel tighter. For not seeing the danger coming. And he blamed himself most for not being able to give the twins what they needed after she was gone. Harper had stopped speaking for almost 3 months. Hayes woke up screaming every night. The slightest sound could send him into panic. Dropping cutlery, a car door slamming outside, even the hum of the blender in the kitchen. The specialists said it was trauma. The therapists said it was grief. But none of their explanations mattered to Damien when he sat alone in the hallway at 3 a.m., holding Hayes as the boys shook uncontrollably, begging for a mother who would never come home. The nannies came and went like passing storms. Some lasted a week. Most didn't make it past 2 days. One woman walked out after Harper bit her arm during a night terror. Another left because Hayes locked himself in the pantry and refused to come out for hours, shaking and crying until he threw up. A few of the nannies tried to pretend they were fine, forcing smiles, speaking softly, but the moment the children spiraled, they folded under the pressure. Damien didn't blame them. Even he could barely handle it, and these were his own children. The last nanny before Ava had arrived with glowing recommendations. Trauma-informed, patient, confident. She lasted exactly 48 hours. On her second night, Harper had woken up screaming about monsters in the hallway. The nanny tried to comfort her, but when Harper clawed at her arms and Hayes began sobbing uncontrollably, she panicked. She locked herself inside the bathroom, calling for Damien, saying she couldn't do it. When he arrived, she pushed past him, tears streaking her face, and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Lockwood. They need something I don't have." Then she left and never returned for her paycheck. Damien didn't know how to fix any of it. He didn't know how to reach 2 children who seemed to be slipping further and further away from him. Most nights he sat on the floor between their beds, staring into the dark, listening to their shallow breathing, waiting for the nightmares to begin. On the worst nights, Harper would wake up gasping, clawing at her throat as if she couldn't breathe. On the worst nights, Hayes would curl into a tight ball on the bedroom floor, rocking himself silently until he fell asleep from exhaustion. On the worst nights, Damien wondered if the twins would ever feel safe again. The mansion itself lost its warmth. The pool was always covered, the lights always dim, the guest rooms always empty. The playroom that used to overflow with toys was now just a storage space for forgotten memories. Staff members whispered, stepping lightly, as if the entire house might break at any moment. Mrs. Perez, the housekeeper who had been with the family for over a decade, watched everything with a quiet sadness. She often left food outside the twins' door, hoping Damien would eat something. He rarely did. There were moments when he thought he was getting better. Days when Harper laughed at a cartoon, or when Hayes held his father's hand without pulling away. But those moments were brief, fragile, easily shattered by the next storm of fear. Damien tried to hide his own breakdowns. He thought the twins didn't see the way he stared at the empty chair Rachel used to sit in. He thought they didn't hear him crying in his office late at night. But children feel what adults try to bury, and the Lockwood twins carried their father's pain as heavily as their own. By the time Ava entered the story, the house was exhausted. The staff was exhausted. Damien was exhausted. And the twins were living inside a world of fear no one could break through. Every door had been tried. Every route explored. Every expert paid. Nothing worked. Which is why the night Damien walked in and saw Ava in that bed, holding his sleeping children like someone who had known them their whole lives, it hit him harder than he could understand. And when he reacted the way he did, he wasn't reacting to Ava at all. He was reacting to years of failure, grief, and nights he couldn't bear to remember. This was the Lockwood home before Ava. Broken beyond hope, running on fear, waiting for someone to do the impossible. By the time the sun finally rose over Miami the next morning, the Lockwood mansion felt heavier than ever. Damien barely slept. The twins woke confused and restless. And the house carried a quiet guilt that seemed to float through every hallway. But while Damien tried to piece together what to do next, someone else was already waking up miles away. Someone who had no idea her life was about to change, or that she would soon walk into a home drowning in grief and transform it from the inside out. And that brings us to the woman no one saw coming. Little Havana woke early, as it always did. The streets buzzed with a familiar mix of music, morning heat, and the distant calls of vendors preparing for the day. Inside a small worn apartment on the second floor of a faded pink building, Ava Lambert sat at the edge of her bed, tying her shoes with the quiet focus of someone who had learned long ago to keep moving, no matter how heavy the days felt. The room was simple, a small dresser, a thrifted lamp, a window that didn't close all the way, but she kept it tidy and warm, because it was hers, and because she knew how to create comfort even in small spaces. Ava worked 3 jobs: cleaning vacation rentals, stocking shelves at a small grocery store, and helping at a community center whenever she could squeeze in the hours. Money was tight, but she survived by stretching every dollar until it almost tore. People who met her often described her as calm, patient, and gentle. Few knew that these traits weren't simply personality. They were skills, carved out of years of loss and hardship. People saw her softness and thought it meant she hadn't been through much. They were wrong. 3 years before, Ava had lost her own child, a little boy named Jordan. A sudden illness, quick and unforgiving. She had spent months afterward trying to understand how the world could keep spinning when hers had stopped. The grief nearly broke her, but she refused to disappear into it. Instead, she channeled every inch of her pain into something she could still do. Be there for children, especially those who needed steady, patient hands. That was why she spent her evenings volunteering at the community center. That was why she always listened before she spoke. That was why, despite everything she lacked, children trusted her. That morning, Ava walked to her bathroom mirror and studied her face. Not in a self-critical way, but in a grounded, honest one. She saw the woman she had fought to become, stronger, calmer, determined. She knew she needed a 4th job, at least temporarily. Rent had increased again, and the grocery store had cut her hours. So she pulled out a neatly folded flyer she'd picked up from a bulletin board the day before. It advertised a housekeeping position at a wealthy waterfront property. Good pay. Long hours. Immediate start. She hesitated only once before dialing the number. By noon, Ava was standing at the gates of the Lockwood mansion, holding her small purse close to her side. She had never been inside a home so large. The walls were tall and white, the windows framed with dark metal, the landscaping trimmed to perfection. Yet something felt off, like beauty had been built on top of something broken. She sensed it even before she walked through the door. Mrs. Perez greeted her warmly, though her smile carried a tired shadow. She led Ava into the sitting room for the interview. Damien entered a few minutes later, looking worn, distant, and distracted. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled as if he'd been pulling at it for hours. He didn't smile, didn't shake her hand. He simply skimmed through her resume with the heavy look of a man who had lost faith in optimism. "You don't have formal nanny experience," he said, his voice low and tired. "I'm applying for housekeeping," Ava replied softly. "You've moved between many jobs." "Yes. Life required it." "You live in Little Havana?" "Yes, sir." His expression didn't change. It wasn't judgment, just exhaustion. He wasn't looking for problems, but life had trained him to expect them. He placed her resume on the table and rubbed his temples, already leaning toward ending the conversation. That was the moment Harper appeared. The little girl approached the doorway holding her stuffed dolphin, her curls messy, her eyes puffy from the morning's tears. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at her father. Instead, she walked across the room and stopped right in front of Ava, staring up at her with a curiosity and cautious warmth Damien hadn't seen from her in months. Ava knelt to Harper's height without hesitation. "Hi," she said gently. "Is this your friend?" Harper nodded and lifted the dolphin for Ava to see. "What's their name?" Ava asked. Another small nod. Then a whisper so soft Damien barely heard it. "Blue." It wasn't much. Just one word. But to Damien, it was a miracle. Harper rarely spoke to strangers. Some days she didn't speak to anyone at all. Ava smiled softly. "That's a wonderful name." Harper moved closer and placed the dolphin lightly in Ava's hands, as if granting her permission to stay. Damien froze, watching the exchange, feeling something soften in his chest. It was small, but it was undeniable. Harper had chosen her. He cleared his throat. "When can you start?" Ava looked up, surprised. "I can start today." "Good," Damien said, standing. "Mrs. Perez will show you around." As Ava followed the older woman through the quiet halls of the mansion, she noticed how cold the house felt. Beautiful, yes, but heavy. The lights were dim. The air held a lingering sadness, like a place holding its breath. Toys lay abandoned in corners. Doors were kept half open, as if someone needed to check on things constantly. And everywhere, she sensed the echo of fear. She saw signs of the children's struggle without anyone telling her. The drawings taped to the wall, filled with dark colors. A broken nightlight near a doorway. A blanket on the floor in the hallway, as if someone slept there often. She didn't ask questions. She simply absorbed the atmosphere, understanding that this house wasn't suffering from misbehavior, it was suffering from grief. That afternoon, Ava met Hayes for the first time. The boy stood in the corner of the playroom, arms crossed, his small face guarded. Ava didn't try to force a smile or coax him out of the corner. She simply sat on the floor nearby and said softly, "If you want someone to sit with, I'm right here." For several minutes, he didn't move. Then, without looking at her, he shifted closer, just a tiny step, barely noticeable. But Ava noticed. She always noticed the small things. She wasn't a nanny. She didn't claim to be one. She didn't try to fix the children. She simply listened. She stayed present. She offered quiet warmth in a house that had forgotten what warmth felt like. And that was the beginning. No one knew it then, but Ava Lambert had just entered the Lockwood home with nothing more than a soft voice and an open heart. And she was about to change everything. By the end of her first week, Ava had slipped into the Lockwood home like a quiet heartbeat. Steady, gentle, unnoticed by the world but deeply felt by the people who needed her most. Harper had begun leaving her bedroom door open at night. Hayes had started sitting closer during meals. Even Mrs. Perez found herself watching Ava with a kind of cautious hope, as if afraid to believe someone this patient could truly exist. But healing, especially for children with wounds no one could see, rarely moved in a straight line. And the night that everything broke open, the night that changed the course of all their lives, began like any other evening in the mansion. Quiet, heavy, with a tension sitting just below the surface. The house grew still after sunset. The twins had spent the late afternoon drawing with Ava in the playroom, their small hands moving over paper with cautious curiosity. It was the most peaceful evening the household had seen in months. By 8 o'clock, though, the familiar signs of trouble began to show. Harper's voice grew quiet, her eyes flicking toward the hallway shadows. Hayes clung to the edge of his blanket, his breathing turning quick and shallow. Nighttime was always the hardest. It was when their memories pressed the loudest, when their fears crept in like cold air through cracks in the walls. Ava understood without needing to be told. After helping them with their baths and laying out their pajamas, she stayed close while they brushed their teeth, speaking to them softly the entire time. She didn't rush them. She didn't push them. She created a circle of calm around them, something steady to hold on to. But as soon as she turned toward the door, intending to give them space to fall asleep, Harper reached out suddenly and grabbed her hand with a grip so desperate it startled her. Hayes didn't speak, but he moved quickly to the other side of her, pressing himself against her hip, shaking his head violently. Ava knelt down between them, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm right outside," she promised. "You can call me any time. You're safe." But Harper's eyes filled with tears, and her small voice trembled. "Don't leave." Hayes echoed her with a tight whisper. "Please stay." Ava's heart ached. She knew boundaries in a home like this mattered. She knew her role. She knew what was expected. But she also knew trauma when she saw it, knew the signs of panic rising in a child's body, knew when fear wasn't just fear, it was memory. She tried again. "Let's take a few deep breaths together," she said softly, placing one hand on each of their backs. They followed her lead, but the panic didn't fade. Their little hands clung to her like she was the last piece of solid ground. And so, after a long moment of hesitation, after weighing what was right, what was helpful, and what was kind, Ava stayed. She climbed onto the large bed with them, sitting against the headboard as the twins curled into her sides. Harper's fingers twisted into the fabric of Ava's shirt. Hayes pressed his face into her arm. Ava hummed softly, a tune she used to sing to Jordan, letting the rhythm calm her as much as it soothed them. Slowly, their breathing evened out. Bit by bit, the tension drained from their bodies. Their eyelids grew heavy. And for the first time in 2 years, the twins fell asleep without crying, without shaking, without fear clawing at their chests. Ava didn't move. She didn't dare risk breaking the moment. She simply held them, gently, her thoughts drifting to her own son, gone too soon. She felt the ache of that memory settle in her chest, but for once, it wasn't sharp. It felt meaningful, as if comforting these 2 broken children allowed her to touch something she thought she had lost forever. Outside, the Miami sky darkened again as rain returned, heavy and sudden. Damien had spent the evening out at a late meeting, trying to handle business matters he could barely focus on. The moment he stepped out of his car, rain soaked through his clothes. He ran up the steps, mind racing with the usual worries. Were the twins asleep? Had there been another meltdown? Did the new worker decide she couldn't handle it either? When he entered the mansion, the house was quiet. Too quiet. He hurried toward the children's wing, water dripping from his hair, his pulse quickening. He pushed open the bedroom door without warning. And froze. Ava was in the bed. His children pressed against her like she belonged there. Her arms around them. Her shoes on the floor. Her body on the mattress he had shared with Rachel on vacations, quiet mornings, and moments he couldn't bear to think about. He didn't see the peace. He didn't see the calm. He didn't see Harper's gentle breathing or Hayes' relaxed hands. All he saw was an employee crossing a line. A stranger in his children's bed. A betrayal he never planned for. "What do you think you're doing?" Damien's voice burst out, sharp and filled with panic. Ava jerked upright, trying not to wake the twins. "Please," she whispered. "Don't shout." They were terrified. The words barely left her mouth before Damien stepped forward, his emotions snapping loose after weeks, months, and years of strain. His hand struck her. The sound cracked through the room like lightning. Ava staggered, one hand flying to her cheek, but she stayed quiet. Harper and Hayes stirred slightly but didn't wake. Ava kept her body steady so she wouldn't disturb them, tears forming but never falling. "You're fired," Damien said, his voice shaking. "Get out. Now." Ava nodded once. She didn't argue. She didn't plead. She didn't look for understanding. She simply leaned down, kissed each child's forehead softly, and slipped out of the bed. She picked up her shoes with trembling fingers and walked toward the door. Mrs. Perez was in the hallway when Ava stepped out. One look at her face, the red mark blooming across her cheek, and the older woman's expression filled with horror and helplessness. Ava didn't speak. She walked down the stairs with quiet dignity, each step carrying both heartbreak and strength. She stepped into the rainy night, closed her coat around her, and walked down the path toward the gate. Upstairs, Damien returned to the bedroom, breath heavy, chest tight. He looked at the twins, expecting chaos. Instead, nothing. They were peaceful. They were steady. They were deeply, safely asleep. It hit him like a punch. They hadn't slept like this since the accident. And he had thrown away the only person who made it happen. His legs weakened, and he sank onto the edge of the bed, face falling into his hands. For the first time since Rachel died, Damien felt something break inside him completely. Regret, shame, and the heavy truth he could no longer ignore. He had just driven away the one person who did the impossible. He started searching for proof that his outrage had been justified. It was a stubborn, ugly instinct. He needed to find something, anything, that said he had been protecting his children rather than punishing someone who had helped them. He checked the dresser drawers and the closet shelves, looking for things out of place. He opened the nightstand and the toy chest. He looked for missing jewelry, cash moved, items disturbed. He found none of it. What he found instead were small signs of care so gentle they stung. A repaired seam on Hayes's favorite blanket. Harper's stuffed dolphin, stitched at the fin with neat, tiny passes of blue thread. A cup by the sink that smelled faintly of warm milk and honey. A towel laid over the radiator to warm before bedtime. A line of sticky notes on the inside of the closet door, each one with a soft reminder in tidy handwriting. Dim lights at 7:30. Don't force eye contact. Try lavender on pillow, 1 drop only. He walked the hallway slowly, taking in details he had never noticed. Toys were grouped, not scattered. The night light near the door had a new bulb. The bath mat was folded and dry. On the playroom table he saw a small stack of drawings, each with the same picture. A wide blue ocean with a small boat, and 2 children on shore holding hands. Under one of them, in Ava's handwriting, someone had written, "You made it to land." He stood there with the paper in his hand until his eyes blurred. Harper woke first. It was still early, gray light filtering through the curtains. She sat up and looked around the room as if something important had been moved. When she found only him there, she froze. Her lower lip trembled. "Where is she?" The words were small and raw. Damien swallowed. "She left." Harper shook her head hard and pressed her hands to her ears, as if she could shut the truth out. She slid off the bed and ran past him into the hall, calling Ava's name. Hayes followed her with a blank, shut-down look on his face. When Damien reached for him, the boy flinched and turned away. He did not speak at all. The morning fell apart from there. Mrs. Perez tried to help them eat breakfast. Harper cried until she was hoarse. Hayes sat at the table without touching a spoon. At one point he climbed under the piano and stayed there, knees hugged to his chest, eyes on the floor. Damien crouched beside him and spoke softly, but the boy kept his mouth closed, his jaw set tight. When Harper finally stopped crying, she curled into the corner of the sofa and stared at the door, waiting for a knock that never came. By noon, Damien went back upstairs alone. He needed air, but he walked back into the children's room instead. On the nightstand lay a small folded note he hadn't noticed in the dark. He opened it with unsteady hands and read the words that ended his defenses. "Fear grows where love is absent. Choose differently." He read it again, and then again, until the words stopped being a sentence and became a mirror. He sat on the edge of the bed and felt the last 2 years land on him all at once. The accident. The guilt. The way he had turned his house into a place where control mattered more than comfort. The way he kept mistaking anger for strength. The way he hid a woman who had done nothing but hold his children while they slept. He broke. Not loudly. Not with the kind of grief that shakes pictures on the wall. He broke the way a person does when they finally stop pretending they are holding it together. His shoulders slumped. His face fell into his hands. He cried into the space where his family used to be whole. It was the first honest collapse he had allowed himself since the day the ocean took Rachel. When he could breathe again, he did the one thing his pride had kept him from doing all his life. He asked for help. He went to find Mrs. Perez. "Do you know where she might be?" His voice didn't sound like his own. "Ava," he added, as if there could be any confusion. The housekeeper held his gaze with a kind of patient pity. "She volunteers in Little Havana," she said. "A community center on 8th Street. When she needs to remember who she is, she goes there." Traffic on Calle Ocho moved slow, the late afternoon heat rising off the asphalt in a shimmer. Music spilled from open doorways. The smell of coffee and fried dough drifted through the air. Damien parked badly and didn't care. He walked past a bodega, a barber shop, and a storefront church until he found the community center with a hand-painted sign and a door propped open with a brick. Inside, fans spun overhead, and the sound of voices curled down the hallway toward a small room at the back. A group of teenage girls sat in a circle on the floor with notebooks spread in their laps. Ava was with them, barefoot in a simple dress, hair pulled back, a pen tucked behind her ear. She wasn't speaking when he first saw her. She was listening, really listening, the way people do when they mean to hold someone's words with both hands. One girl laughed, and Ava's face lit for a second, unguarded and warm in a way he had never seen in his house. When she noticed him in the doorway, the room changed. Not because anyone told it to, but because the current shifted around her. She stood and excused herself with a soft word. He stepped back into the hall. They faced each other with an arm's length of space between them and the weight of last night laid out on the floor like a barrier. "I was wrong," he said. There was no preface, no defense. "I reacted without listening. I put my hands on you." His mouth felt dry. "I am sorry." Ava looked tired, not only from work, but from the kind of disappointment that sets deep. "You don't need to say those words to feel better," she said quietly. "You need to change what made them possible." "I know," he said. He didn't, not fully, but he knew enough. "Please come back. The children, they needed you." Ava didn't answer right away. She studied his face with a level, steady look. When she did speak, her voice was clear. "If I come back, it's not as a cleaner who fills in the gaps of a broken system. It's as a partner in how this house runs. I won't be filmed. No cameras in their rooms. We eat dinner together. No phones, no closed doors. The twins help write the rules. Bedtime is calm and predictable. No yelling. Ever. And if you raise your hand again, to me or to them, I leave and I don't come back." He opened his mouth and then closed it. Pride wanted to argue. Control wanted a loophole. Fear wanted a guarantee. But the memory of Hayes under the piano and Harper whispering, "Where is she?" made the choice for him. "Done," he said. The word surprised him with how right it felt. No cameras in the bedrooms. Family dinners. Shared rules. No yelling. His voice dropped. "And I will never touch you in anger again." Ava's eyes softened a fraction, but she didn't smile. "I also choose my hours," she said. "And I need 1 day a week at this center. It keeps me grounded. If I'm no good to myself, I'm no good to your children." He nodded. "1 day at the center," he said. "Whatever you need to stay whole." They stood in that warm hallway in Little Havana with the hum of fans and the scratch of pens on paper from the room behind them. For a second, the world shrank to simple things. A promise made. A line drawn. A house waiting. "When do you want me to start?" she asked. "Tonight," he said, because the twins couldn't afford another lost day. "Please." Ava glanced back at the girls, then at him. "I'll finish this class and meet you at the house," she said. "But hear me, Damien. We don't go back to the way things were. We build something new." He managed a small, grateful nod. "Something new," he repeated. On the drive home, the city looked different. The streets were the same, the buildings the same, the soft pink light of evening the same. But his chest felt looser, as if a knot had come undone. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw Harper at the window, watching the road with the worn dolphin pressed to her cheek. Hayes stood behind her, trying not to hope. Damien climbed the steps and paused at the front door. He thought of the note on the nightstand. "Fear grows where love is absent. Choose differently." He put his hand on the doorknob and let the words settle in his bones. This time, he chose differently. Ava returned to the mansion just after sunset, carrying nothing but her small purse and the quiet confidence of someone who knew her worth now had boundaries. The rain had stopped, leaving the air warm and still. The lights in the Lockwood home were dim, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't look like a warning sign. It looked like a place waiting for something to shift. When she stepped through the door, Harper and Hayes ran to her so fast it startled her. their little arms wrapping around her waist as if they finally believed she wouldn't disappear again. That moment alone said everything. The house was ready to breathe again. It was ready for change. And that change began the moment Ava stepped inside. Ava didn't start her second chapter in the Lockwood home with grand gestures or dramatic speeches. She started with structure. Gentle, simple, reliable structure. It was the first thing the house had been missing. She sat with Damien at the dining table that same night and outlined the new rules with the same calm certainty she carried during the interview. No yelling, not from anyone, she began. Not in frustration, not in panic, not even by accident. Raising your voice can feel like danger to children who have lived through trauma. Damien nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't rationalize. He just listened, absorbing every word with the seriousness of someone who now understood the cost of not listening. Dinner together, she continued. Every night you are home. No phones. No distractions. The children need to see their father's face, not the top of his head while he scrolls. He accepted that too. Family night, once a week. It doesn't have to be big. A board game. A movie. Painting. Anything that builds connection. She paused then, meeting his eyes. They don't need perfection. Just presence. Damien let out a long breath. I can do that. Ava nodded. And bedtime changes completely. No bright lights. No rushing. No separation the moment the lights go out. They need the transition to feel safe. He hesitated, the memory of the night before flickering across his face. I understand. Good, Ava said softly. Because they need consistency, not fear. And they need to see us working together, not against each other. With the ground rules set, Ava turned her focus toward dismantling the quiet, toxic systems that had been slowly suffocating the twins. She began with small things. She opened the curtains in the playroom, letting natural light spill across the floor. She rearranged the furniture in the twins' bedroom, removing the old dresser that blocked part of the window and made the room feel cramped. She placed a small rug beside the bed to soften the morning wake-ups. She added a soft lamp with warm lighting to replace the harsh overhead bulb that cast shadows at night. She brought in sensory toys, items that grounded anxious hands and gave fearful minds something safe to hold. She changed the tone of the house too. No more whispered conversations among the staff, as if silence could prevent another tragedy. No more tiptoeing through hallways. No more waiting for the next emotional explosion. Ava encouraged gentle music in the mornings, soft jazz or instrumental guitar. She taught Mrs. Perez a few grounding exercises she could use when things got tense. She spoke to the chef about meals that brought comfort, not just nutrition. She even rearranged the kitchen so the children could reach the snack cabinet without climbing like they were scaling a mountain. The mansion slowly shifted, from a place of survival into a place of healing. The twins responded to these changes in small, precious ways. Harper began speaking more, sometimes in quiet strings of sentences that surprised even her. She started asking Ava questions, sometimes about simple things. Why birds fly, why the sky darkens, but sometimes about deeper fears, questions no 7-year-old should have to ask. And Ava answered every one of them with patience and honesty, never talking down to her, never dismissing her worries. Hayes began to smile again. Not always, and not freely, but it happened, and that was enough to make Damien stop in surprise the first time he saw it. Hayes even started helping Ava set the table in the evenings, handing her forks and napkins with shy pride. When she introduced therapy play, gentle activities designed to help children release fear through drawing, building, or role play, Hayes took to it instinctively. He drew the ocean, dark and big, but he also drew himself on the shore, holding a small hand, safe. Damien watched these changes from a quiet distance at first. He tried not to interfere. He didn't want to disrupt the fragile progress that Ava was creating. But little by little, he found himself stepping closer, not out of control, but out of curiosity and something deeper he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. He noticed the way Ava's voice softened when she spoke to the twins, how her presence made the house feel less sharp around the edges. He watched her move through the halls with a patience that felt uncommon in a world that rushed everything. And the more he watched, The more he realized he wasn't learning how she handled the children. He was learning how to handle himself. He started participating in the new rituals she created. Family dinners where he listened when Harper talked about her drawings and where he watched Hayes take tiny bites of food without fear. Evening routines where he sat with Ava and the twins while they read books under soft lights. He learned that safety didn't always come from control. Sometimes it came from letting go, from breathing deeply, from allowing love to have a place again. The house began to feel different too. It no longer resembled a museum filled with untouched furniture and unsaid thoughts. Warm light replaced cold shadows. The sound of laughter, small, hesitant at first, then fuller, echoed through the hallways. The staff moved with less fear, sensing that something inside the Lockwood home had shifted, softened. And Damien, without meaning to, began to see Ava differently. Not as staff. Not as a solution to a problem. But as a woman with depth, with strength, with a quiet resilience that drew him in. It wasn't romantic yet, not in an obvious way, but it was human. It was recognition. It was gratitude mixed with curiosity. It was the understanding that she carried her own scars but chose gentleness anyway. One night, after the twins had fallen asleep without panic for the fourth time that week, Damien found himself standing in the doorway of the playroom watching Ava clean up crayons and small blocks. She was humming the same soft melody she sang to the children when they couldn't breathe. For a moment, he simply watched her, feeling something inside him loosen, like a knot pulled apart with steady hands. "You're changing them," he said quietly. Ava looked up, brushing a curl behind her ear. "No," she replied. "They're healing. I'm just giving them space to." "And me?" he asked, not sure why the question slipped out. A small warm smile touched her lips. Not flirtatious, just honest. "You're learning," she said. "That's enough for now." Damien nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. For the first time since the accident, he felt something he almost didn't recognize. Hope. Not for the future, not yet. But for the next morning. And sometimes, that's where healing begins. The weeks that followed felt almost like a sunrise inside the Lockwood home. Not a sudden burst of brightness, but a slow warming of the air, little by little, moment by moment. Harper laughed again. Hayes let Damien tuck him into bed. And Ava's presence became the steady thread holding all of them together. For the first time in years, Damien felt as if the worst might finally be behind them. But life rarely allows healing to happen quietly. Sometimes, just when a house begins to find its balance, the world outside pushes back harder than anyone expects. And that push came in the form of two people Damien had been trying to avoid since the day Rachel died. It began with a letter, simple white envelope, no decoration, no warning. The butler found it on the porch just after sunrise and brought it straight to Damien. He was in his office reviewing one of Harper's drawings, a picture she had made of the four of them standing in a garden, holding hands. The moment he saw the handwriting on the envelope, his heart sank. He didn't even need to open it to know what it was. Rachel's parents, Charles and Margaret Whitmore, were not cruel people, but grief had hardened them into something rigid and cold. They had never forgiven Damien for taking their daughter out on the water that day. They never said it directly, but the look in their eyes every time they saw him carried the same unspoken accusation. You lived. She didn't. And now, after 2 years of distance, silence, and failed attempts at reconciliation, they had chosen their moment to strike. The letter stated, in clear legal language, that they were filing for temporary and permanent custody of Harper and Hayes. It accused Damien of being unstable, negligent, and emotionally unfit. It referenced past nanny turnover rates. It mentioned violent tendencies, a phrase that made Damien's stomach twist. And it claimed the children were exposed to an unqualified caretaker with no professional credentials, referring to Ava as though she were a threat instead of the reason the children had finally begun to heal. He read the letter twice. Then a third time. Each word felt like a blow to the chest. Ava found him still sitting in the office when she came downstairs to prepare breakfast. She noticed the envelope first, then the pale, strained look on Damien's face. "What happened?" she asked. He handed her the letter without speaking. She read it slowly, her expression tightening with every line. When she finished, She let the paper fall gently onto the desk. "They're going after the children," she said quietly. Damien nodded. "They think I'm hurting them. They think you're hurting them." Ava shook her head. "No. They don't think that. They're angry. They're grieving. And they're looking for the easiest person to blame." "They're going to court," Damien said. "They've already filed." Before Ava could respond, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Perez answered it, and a moment later a woman in a navy blazer stepped into the foyer, clipboard, badge, and the tense stance of someone who had done far too many home visits. "Mr. Lockwood?" she asked. Damien stood. "Yes. My name is Nadia Reyes. I'm with the Child and Family Safety Division. I'm here for an emergency welfare check." Ava felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Within minutes, the house, once peaceful, was tense again. Nadia walked through every room, her pen clicking rhythmically as she made notes. She interviewed the staff. She spoke to the twins individually, which nearly sent Hayes back into a panic spiral. Cameras on her lapel documented everything. Every corner, every object, every expression. When she reached Ava, her tone sharpened. "And your title is what exactly?" Nadia asked. "Housekeeper," Ava replied calmly. "But you are performing childcare duties. When the children need comfort, yes." "Are you licensed?" "No." "Formally trained?" "In life," Ava said softly. Nadia didn't appreciate the answer. Her eyebrow lifted with cold judgment. "So, no professional qualifications." "I'm not pretending to be a professional," Ava said. "I'm being human." The investigator made another note. By nightfall, the entire house was on edge. Harper refused to sleep in her room. Hayes sat beside the stairs with his stuffed elephant, waiting for Ava to come back from the meeting with the lawyers. Damien felt torn between rage and fear. Rage at Rachel's parents for causing more harm, fear that he really could lose his children if one wrong detail was interpreted the wrong way. The court hearing was scheduled 3 days later. The courtroom felt colder than any room Damien had ever been in. Margaret and Charles sat on the opposite side, stiff-backed and dressed in somber attire. Their lawyers spoke with polished aggression, painting Damien as overwhelmed, unstable, unpredictable, and deeply irresponsible. They pointed to unresolved grief, to emotional outbursts, to the night of the slap, an incident they had somehow learned about through a staff member who spoke out of fear rather than malice. They presented photographs, timelines, past nanny resignations, the state evaluation notes. They even brought in an expert witness who spoke about the dangers of unregulated caregivers, making Ava sound like a walking hazard instead of a steady, warm presence who had done more for the twins in weeks than all the specialists had in 2 years. Ava sat quietly through it all, her hands clasped together in her lap, her face steady but her heart pounding. When the judge finally called her forward, the room shifted. She walked with controlled calm, the kind that comes from surviving things harder than courtrooms. The judge asked her questions, direct, sometimes harsh. "How long have you been in the home? What is your training? Did you cross professional boundaries? Did you sleep in the children's bed? Did Mr. Lockwood strike you? Are you emotionally involved in ways that interfere with your duties?" Ava answered everything truthfully. But truth wasn't enough. Not when perception carried so much weight. Finally, the judge leaned back. "Ms. Lambert, in your own words, tell me why you believe the children are better in Mr. Lockwood's care." Ava inhaled slowly. Then she spoke. "When I met Harper and Hayes, they were drowning in fear," she said. "Not because their father failed them, but because grief swallowed their home. I've never seen children try so hard to be brave while shaking inside. But I also saw something else. I saw a father who never stopped trying, not even when he was broken himself." She paused, letting the silence settle. These children don't need perfection. They need stability. They need patience. They need the man who carries their drawings in his pocket and sits outside their door every night. They need the father who is willing to change everything about his life just to see them smile again. And they need a home where love isn't something they fear will disappear. Her voice softened even more. Fear grows where love is absent. But there is love in that house. It just needed room to breathe. The courtroom fell silent. The judge took several moments before speaking. When he finally delivered the ruling, his voice was steady. Custody will remain with Mr. Lockwood. Damien exhaled for the first time in hours. But let me be clear, the judge continued. Mr. Lockwood, one more misstep, one more sign of instability or emotional volatility, and these children will be removed. You are on the thinnest of ice. Choose your actions carefully. The gavel fell. The court adjourned. Damien sat still, absorbing the weight of the warning. Ava placed a gentle hand on the back of his chair, not to comfort him, but to remind him he wasn't alone. The fight was far from over, but something in the air had shifted. For the first time, the world outside the Lockwood home had seen exactly who Ava was. And it was no longer possible to pretend she didn't matter. The court ruling brought relief, but not peace. The Whitmores left the courtroom with stiff shoulders and tight mouths, the kind of anger that didn't fade but rather folded itself into silence, waiting for the next opportunity to rise. Damien held onto Harper and Hayes with a new gentleness as they left the courthouse, aware now more than ever that one mistake, just one, could cost him everything. Ava stayed close behind, steady and calm, her presence still the anchor that kept the household upright. But healing never moves in straight lines. It moves through new challenges, new faces, and sometimes through people who arrive in your life unexpectedly, carrying storms of their own. And the next chapter of the Lockwood story began in a small community room back in Little Havana. The community center on 8th Street was crowded that afternoon. It always was. Teenagers hung around the front steps, music pulsed from an old speaker mounted high on a wall, and the warm smell of Cuban food drifted from a vendor outside selling pastelitos from a metal tray. Ava walked through the entrance with the same calm confidence she carried everywhere, her body moving with quiet purpose. The children and teens who often sought her attention flocked to her quickly, but she greeted each one with patience before heading to the back room. Damien had taken a greater interest in the community center after hearing how much time Ava spent there. Their conversation after court had been brief, but meaningful. If this place keeps you grounded, he had said, then it deserves more support. And he meant it. Within a week, he had donated enough funds for new art supplies, updated lighting, and therapy-centered activities. The center director hugged him when the check cleared. Ava simply smiled, soft and full, as though she knew what this investment meant, not just for the center, but for him. That was where she first met Lila Johnson. Lila was 15, sharp-eyed, and angry in the way only a teenager with too many wounds and not enough support can be. She sat in the corner, legs crossed, hoodie pulled tight, arms marked with faded scars she didn't bother hiding. Ava noticed her immediately, not because she stood out, but because she tried so hard not to. When the other teens gathered for a group activity, Lila stayed put. Ava approached her gently, sitting down on the floor a few feet away, not close enough to crowd her, not far enough to feel distant. "You don't want to join them?" Ava asked softly. Lila shrugged without looking up. "They don't want me there. That's not what I asked." Lila didn't respond. Instead she played with a loose thread on her sleeve, twisting it until it almost snapped. Ava watched her quietly, understanding that this kind of silence was a language of its own. "You can sit here with me," Ava said, "if you want." Lila didn't move, but her shoulders softened just slightly. That was enough. When Ava returned home that evening, Harper and Hayes were waiting by the staircase, eager for their bedtime routine. The twins had grown attached to Ava almost without realizing it. Their bond with her was natural and steady, something they felt rather than thought about. When Ava mentioned Lila at dinner, Harper's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Is she nice?" Harper asked. "She's strong," Ava replied. "And she's learning how to trust people." Hayes listened quietly, pushing a piece of broccoli around his plate. "Maybe we can help," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Damien, sitting at the head of the table, watched Ava interact with the children and felt something shift again. She didn't treat them like fragile pieces of glass. She didn't tiptoe around their trauma. She invited them into compassion, into empathy, into becoming bigger versions of themselves. And the twins responded because they trusted her more than they trusted anyone else, including him. A few days later, Ava brought Lila to the mansion for an art activity she hoped might help both her and the twins. Harper greeted Lila with shy excitement, while Hayes clung to Ava's arm at first but eventually warmed up enough to offer her a marker. Lila acted tough, like she didn't care, but Ava saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes when the twins treated her like a person worth knowing. They spent the afternoon painting under the tall windows of the sunroom. Harper painted flowers. Hayes painted boats. Lila painted storms, dark clouds swirling over open water. It didn't escape Ava's notice. Damien joined them near the end, intending only to observe, but found himself drawn to the scene. The room, once cold and unused, looked lived in again. Sunlight warmed the tiles. Brushes dipped in color. Laughter, soft, tentative, real, filled the air. And Lila, who usually could not sit still for more than 5 minutes, stayed engaged for almost an hour. But good things rarely go unnoticed by the wrong people. 3 days later, Ava's picture appeared on a local news site under a sensational headline. Billionaire hires unlicensed maid to care for his traumatized children. Within hours, the story spread. Social media picked it up. Comment sections exploded with opinions from people who didn't know a thing about the Lockwood family. The Whitmores were mentioned anonymously as concerned relatives, and someone leaked parts of the state investigator's notes, twisting her observations to make Ava seem like a reckless amateur endangering 2 already fragile children. The real blow came when a forged report surfaced, one that claimed Ava had used unapproved therapeutic methods and had inappropriate physical contact with minors at the community center. The accusation was fake, cruel, and designed to be damaging enough that the state would have to consider it. It put the twins' stability at risk. It put Ava's entire life at risk. Damien was furious. Not just for himself, but for her. "I won't let them do this," he said, his voice tight. "I won't let them tear apart everything you've built." Ava didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply asked, "What do the children need right now?" That had always been her focus, even when the world tried to weaponize her presence. The community center called for an emergency meeting that evening. Parents, teens, staff, and even a few reporters gathered in a cramped room. Ava arrived quietly, wearing the same calm expression she always did. Lila stood in the corner, arms crossed, glaring at anyone who looked Ava's way. When the director asked Ava if she wanted to defend herself, she nodded once. "I don't have formal training," she said. "I don't have a degree that tells you I know how to love a child through grief. What I have is lived experience. I've held children through panic attacks. I've sat in emergency rooms. I've buried my own son. I don't pretend to be something I'm not. I just show up where I'm needed and offer the one thing every hurting child deserves: safety." A murmur spread through the room. Some supportive, some skeptical. Before anyone could respond, Lila suddenly stepped forward. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Stop blaming her," Lila said. "You want to know the truth? I'm the one who started the rumor about unapproved methods. I got mad when she told me I couldn't fight another girl in the hallway, so I said she was doing weird therapy stuff. I didn't think it would spread. I didn't think anyone would believe me. But I'm not letting you ruin her life for something I made up." The room went silent. Ava turned to Lila with a look of quiet understanding, not anger. That look alone told the entire crowd everything they needed to know about her character. The director cleared his throat. "The accusation is withdrawn. Effective immediately." Ava's name was cleared. Slowly, the story online began to correct itself as well. But the damage lingered, as damage always does. Damien saw how exhausted she looked, how heavy the week had been on her shoulders. And in that moment, something inside him solidified. Not admiration, not gratitude, but something deeper, something that scared him in a way he wasn't ready to name. Ava was no longer just the woman who helped his children. She had become the woman who held his entire world together. And he wasn't sure what to do with the weight of that truth. The night after Lila Johnson cleared Ava's name, the mansion felt unusually still. The kind of stillness that doesn't bring peace but quiet questions. Questions about loyalty, trust, and what happens when the world decides to attack what you've built. Ava spent most of the night awake. Not because of fear or guilt or anything tied to the rumor. Those battles were already behind her. It was Lila's voice that replayed in her mind, trembling and angry and brave all at once. It reminded Ava of something she had buried years ago, something she had never wanted to touch again. And for the first time since moving into the mansion, she realized that healing wasn't a straight path not just for Harper and Hayes, but for herself as well. The morning came quietly. Too quietly. And that was when the past knocked on her door. Ava was helping Harper braid her hair when the intercom chimed from downstairs. Mrs. Perez's voice came through with an edge Ava had never heard before. "Ava, there's someone here asking for you." She didn't think much of it until she reached the foyer, and saw the woman standing in the center of the marble floor. Tall, well-dressed, expression smooth and unreadable, hair pinned perfectly, not a single strand out of place. Eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. Ava froze. Her mother, Eloise Lambert. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. Damien stepped out of his office at the same moment, sensing Ava's shift in energy. His gaze moved from Ava to Eloise, and something cold flared in his expression, the protective instinct that had grown stronger with each passing week. Eloise turned with a slow, graceful pivot, her eyes landing on Damien with a polite but dismissive smile. "You must be Mr. Lockwood. I'm Eloise, Ava's mother. I'm here to speak with my daughter." Ava swallowed hard. Her voice came out steady, even though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. "Why are you here?" Eloise's brows lifted. "Is that how you greet your own mother?" "I asked a question," Ava said quietly. Damien stepped closer, not interfering, but making it clear Ava didn't stand alone. Eloise noticed, and her smile thinned. "I heard you were in the news," Eloise said. "Again. Making a scene. Getting involved with wealthy men. Playing hero in places you don't belong." Her voice softened into the tone Ava remembered too well, a sweet, poisoned tone. "And I thought, maybe you finally needed guidance." "I don't need anything from you," Ava said. Harper and Hayes had come downstairs, peering from the staircase in confused silence. Ava glanced at them for a brief moment, her heart twisting. She did not want them seeing this. She did not want them hearing this tone, this history, this pain. Damien stepped in gently. "Perhaps this isn't the best time." Eloise's eyes narrowed. "My daughter will speak when I say she will." Ava flinched, barely, but enough for Damien to see. He moved between them slowly, deliberately. "In this house, we don't speak to people like that." The room tightened. Eloise's lips parted, ready to argue, but Ava lifted a hand. "Leave," she said. "You came to feel powerful, to remind me of what you think I owe you. But I don't owe you anything." For the first time, Eloise's perfect composure cracked. Her eyes flickered, exposed. But she recovered quickly, lifting her chin. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "You always do." She turned and walked out, heels clicking like a metronome of old wounds Ava thought she had buried. When the door closed, Ava's body finally loosened, shoulders dropping as if she had been holding up the weight of her entire past at once. The twins watched her carefully, and Harper was the first to move, walking down the stairs, wrapping her small arms around Ava's waist. Ava held her close, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Damien stood a few steps back, watching, realizing that this was the first time he had ever seen Ava vulnerable. Not calm, not composed, not steady, just human. And it made something inside him shift again, something tender and dangerous. But the past wasn't finished. 3 days later, at the community center, Ava was leading a small circle with Lila Johnson and 2 other teens when the door opened. A tall man walked in. Broad shoulders, creased forehead, hands rough from work. But his eyes, dark, tired, wounded, were unmistakable. Her father, Marcus Lambert. Ava's breath caught in her throat. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood there, staring at her with the look of someone who had rehearsed a conversation 1,000 times and still didn't know where to start. Lila sensed the tension immediately. She leaned in toward Ava and whispered, "You want me to kick him out?" Ava smiled faintly. "No, baby. It's okay." Marcus stepped forward slowly. "Ava, please." His voice cracked. "I heard about the hearing. The kids. The girl. Everything. And I needed to see you." Ava's heart ached, but old pain rose too quickly for comfort. "You left," she said, "when I needed you most." Marcus lowered his head. "Your mother." She pushed me away. "She told me you didn't want me. I believed her because I didn't think I deserved you. And then, after we lost him, I didn't know how to breathe around you." Ava felt her eyes sting. The room blurred slightly. Lila glanced between them, realizing this was not a moment for jokes or defense. Ava whispered, "I can't rewrite the past." "I'm not asking you to," Marcus said. "I'm asking for a chance to be part of your future. Even if it's small. Even if it's nothing more than standing in the back of a room just so I can say I saw you trying to help kids like you used to be." Ava stood still for a long, quiet moment. Her breath trembled, not from fear, but from the old ache of loving someone who didn't know how to love back. Finally she said, "I don't know if I'm ready." Marcus nodded. "Then I'll wait. However long it takes." He stepped back, giving her space, showing the respect he never did before. As he left, Lila wrapped an arm around Ava's shoulder. "Hey," she said gently. "That was brave." Ava blinked away tears. "I'm just tired of running from ghosts." Lila squeezed her hand. "Then don't run. Let them watch you heal." That night, back at the mansion, Damien found Ava sitting on the back patio, watching the lights around the pool reflect like little stars dancing across the water. He sat next to her without a word, giving her the kind of quiet support she needed. After a long silence, he slid a folder across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Ava opened it slowly. Her eyes widened. Co-director of the Lockwood Healing Foundation. A second document sat beneath it. "In the event of my death, Ava Marisol Lambert will serve as legal guardian of Harper and Hayes Lockwood." Ava looked up at him, stunned. "Damien, why?" He didn't answer immediately. He simply held her gaze, steady, honest, unflinching. "Because you're family," he said softly. "And because I trust you with everything I am." Ava inhaled sharply, overwhelmed, unable to speak. For the first time in years, someone was giving her a future instead of taking one away. Yet as meaningful as this moment was, Ava sensed something else too. A shadow she couldn't name, something approaching. Something the house wasn't ready for. The storm wasn't done with them. Not yet. After Damien slid the documents across the patio table that night, something settled inside the Lockwood home. Something steady, something new. Not the absence of tension, but the beginning of peace. Ava didn't say much in the days that followed. She moved through the house with her usual quiet strength, but Damien could tell that the gesture had shifted something deep inside her. And the twins sensed it too. They hovered around her with a softer, almost protective tenderness, as if they knew she had carried the weight of 1,000 storms just to stand in this place with them. But life didn't stop to give anyone a moment to catch their breath. It pushed forward. It stretched. It grew. And soon, the mansion itself would grow too, into something none of them could have imagined a few months earlier. The morning of the opening ceremony arrived with a soft warmth in the air, the kind that made the garden behind the Lockwood mansion glow gently in the rising light. Staff members moved through the lawn, setting up chairs, arranging ribbons, adjusting flower stands. Damien stood near the front steps, tie slightly loose, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a billionaire and more like a father who had fought his way through fire to reach this day. The Lockwood Healing Foundation, once just an idea whispered in the quiet of difficult nights, was finally real. A place built for children navigating trauma, grief, emotional wounds, and the heaviness life sometimes places on small shoulders. Ava stood beside him, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress, nothing extravagant, just something that felt like her, steady, warm, present. She looked out over the garden with the same calm she brought into every room, but her heart was thudding. This foundation wasn't just a program. It was a piece of her history, a piece of her healing, stitched into the heart of the Lockwood estate. Harper and Hayes buzzed with excitement, dressed in matching cream outfits, each holding a small basket of paper hearts they planned to hand out during the ceremony. They kept looking up at Ava, their eyes shining with a pride too big for their small bodies. Guests arrived slowly, community members, teachers, social workers, neighbors, and even a few people who hadn't stepped foot in the mansion since before Rachel's death. They were curious, hopeful, and surprised by what they found. A home that once felt like a silent museum of grief had become warm, open, and full of life. The ceremony began quietly. Damien didn't deliver a dramatic speech. That wasn't his way, not anymore. He simply stood before the small crowd, cleared his throat, and spoke from a place that had been closed off for years. My children and I owe the world to someone who walked into our lives when the darkness was at its worst, he said. His eyes moved to Ava for a moment before returning to the crowd. This foundation is not about charity. It's about giving kids what saved us, understanding, gentleness, and a chance to heal at their own pace. There were no cameras, no reporters, no staged applause. Just people who understood what pain could do to a house, a family, a child. When Damien finished, the audience clapped softly. But the ceremony didn't end there. A staff member stepped forward and called Lila Johnson's name. Lila walked out from the patio, dressed in a white blouse and black pants, hair pulled into a neat bun, a far cry from the hoodies and slouched posture she once hid behind. Her steps were small but sure. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't shrinking into the background. She stood at the center of the garden, holding her head high. Ava couldn't stop the tears that slipped quietly down her face. Lila approached the podium with a short written speech in a trembling hand. She unfolded the paper, glanced at it once, then folded it again. "I had something written," she said, voice unsteady. "But I don't need it." Her eyes lifted, meeting Ava's. "I just need to say thank you. I was angry at everyone. I thought nobody wanted me. Then Ava showed up and saw something in me I couldn't see myself." The crowd grew silent. "She didn't treat me like a problem. She treated me like someone who mattered. And Mr. Lockwood, your support saved our whole center. I never had people fight for me before. I don't know what I'd be without you." She paused, wiping her cheek. "Probably something worse." Ava pressed a hand to her chest. Damien's jaw tightened with emotion. Harper tugged on Ava's dress, whispering, "She's brave now because of you." Ava could only hold Harper close and breathe through the wave of emotion rising inside her. After the final ribbon was cut and the foundation officially opened, people lingered on the lawn, celebrating slowly, sharing food, laughter, warm hugs, and soft moments. The twins stayed glued to Ava, unwilling to let her move too far away. They had something planned, and they struggled to contain their excitement. When most guests drifted inside, Harper grabbed Ava's hand. "Come with us," she whispered urgently. Hayes took the other hand. They guided Ava to the old willow tree at the edge of the garden, its branches hanging low, like arms stretching down to hug the ground. Damien stood nearby, pretending to be distracted, but Ava noticed the way he watched her with a quiet anticipation. Harper and Hayes motioned for her to kneel. She did, and Hayes brought out a wooden plaque wrapped in tissue paper. Together, they lifted it into her hands. Ava unwrapped it slowly. On the plaque, carved with uneven little letters and decorated with stickers and paint, were the words, "Our safe place. Harper and Hayes." Ava covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Harper leaned into her, small arms wrapping around her shoulders. Hayes pressed his cheek to her side and whispered, "Don't ever go away." Ava gathered them both into her arms, holding them tightly, feeling the truth of the moment settling deep inside her bones. She wasn't just someone who helped them heal. She had become part of their home. When the twins ran off to show Lila their artwork, Ava stayed kneeling under the willow tree, still holding the plaque. Damien walked toward her slowly, stopping close enough that she could feel the shape of his silence. "You did that," he said gently. "You gave them a place where their fear finally had somewhere to rest." Ava rose slowly, brushing a tear from her cheek. They did it themselves, she whispered. They just needed someone to believe in them. Damien studied her for a long moment, eyes soft, voice steady. Ava, you didn't just save them. He paused, swallowing hard. You saved me. Ava inhaled deeply, every emotion she'd held back. Fear, gratitude, love, blending into something heavy and warm in her chest. Damien reached for her hand, not with hesitation but with certainty, as though he had already lived this moment in his mind 100 times. Walk with me, he said softly. They crossed the garden together, weaving between lanterns and half-empty chairs until they reached the small stone path lined with lilies that Rachel once planted. It was quiet there. Gentle. Sacred. Not a place of replacement or forgetting, but a place of acknowledgement, of honoring where the pain had been and where the healing now stood. Damien turned to face her fully. No theatrics. No speeches. Just honesty. I don't want to move forward without you, he said. Not as my employee. Not as a caretaker. As someone who built a home with me when I didn't know how to build one alone. Ava felt her chest tighten with emotion. I'm not asking for the right words, he continued. I'm asking you to stay. To stay with me. To stay with them. To stay with this family we somehow became. The proposal wasn't dramatic. There was no kneeling. No jewelry. No staged applause. Just a man asking the woman who saved his children, and him, to remain beside them in the life she had already helped shape. Ava stepped closer, placing both hands against his chest. I'll stay, she whispered. Not because I need a home, but because I helped build one here. Damien closed his eyes, letting the truth wash through him. When he opened them again, the weight that had sat on his shoulders since the accident felt lighter, almost gone. The twins burst into the garden seconds later, running toward them with Lila behind them, laughing loudly for the first time Ava had ever heard. The sound filled the space like sunlight breaking through clouds. Staff members came outside carrying trays of food, and neighbors drifted back into the yard, drawn by the warmth of the moment without even realizing why. The mansion, once cold, silent, broken, was alive again. Windows glowed with soft lights. Laughter floated through the air. Footsteps echoed across the floors with familiarity, not fear. It was messy and imperfect, full of noise and life and unpredictable moments. But it was a home. A home no one believed could exist again. And at the heart of it all was the impossible family who changed everything. Ava, Damien, Harper, Hayes, and even Lila. Proof that love can rebuild what grief destroys, and that sometimes the most broken places become the safest ones when the right people walk in. If this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you that healing is possible, that families can be rebuilt, and that good people still change lives, then take a moment to subscribe. It helps our little community grow, and it keeps stories like this alive. And before you go, tell me in the comments what part stayed with you the most. I'd love to hear your thoughts.